I'm the director of YN Studio, so we are the architects of the project, which is specifically this building. There are other projects I'm going to talk about. And yeah, the building was delivered 3 years ago or so. And we're also, our studios are inside the building. So the plan for today is we're going to talk about the square at a high level, because there's a whole sequence of events that have led to the building happening. And I can give you guys a little tour through the project. We're going to zigzag up and then we'll end in our studio. There is a meeting room. I can't find the right cable for it, so I am going to show you a film on our TV. So I think we'll get in there. We'll fit in our studio, but apologies, it's a bit cramped. The film I'm going to show is on our website, so if you want to watch it more closely, and that will explain a little bit more about who the client is and how they how the project came about. So without further ado, let's talk about the outside of the building first and the history of the square. So where we're stood used to be a car park until about 2006. Obviously the buildings around us are Victorian terraced houses originally, with shops at the ground floor. If you go onto Bradbury Street itself, that is what you will find. That's what it looks like. So masonry, load-bearing construction. What this project does is in the kind of late 70s, it was converted from that use into a kind of workspace development. So external deck access points were added. There's a tiny photo of it which I can show for the film, but many of you who are old enough may remember what the building was like. So it was basically the back of a Victorian terrace with rows of deck access, and all the units were kind of 30 square meters accessed from outside in. In the late 90s, there were 10 market pods delivered by Hawkins Brown architects, and they won awards at the time, but were intended to last for 10 years. They lasted for, I think, 20 years around. They won some design awards, and they basically created this community of small retail units designed for startup businesses. So that's in the late 90s. In 2004, this wing of the building was created, the Culture House. So that contains a jazz club at the bottom, general rehearsal spaces, and more workspace units that connect to this building. In 2006, so 20 years ago now, finally the car park that had been here became a public space. So at that point, the square was kind of founded, and it's become home to a completely diverse range of people and uses. You get skateboarders, music, street drinking, everything, a whole kind of... Hello?
Yeah, it's all the 70s. In the 70s, that Bradbury Street was derelict.
Yes, yeah.
Completely full of rats.
Fine.
All that sort of thing. So it's early 80s that bit was developed.
Yes, exactly. So
we did that.
Yeah, no, I know. So the stair core was built in the late 80s, yeah. So our project was essentially to, I should say, sorry, there's a plan for the square that was never completed, which is why there is a car park on half of it. So there is a public space that was intended to go all the way to Stamford Works over here, and then they were intended originally for there to be buildings built in these corners that would essentially make the square a completely different proportion and longer and thinner over this way. So when we arrived on the scene in 2017, when the project gained some funding, the ambition was essentially to make as much new workspace as we could, and the client, who is Hackney Co-operative Developments, they're aiming to make affordable workspaces for Hackney residents. They gained some funding to make as much workspace as they could, but also to improve the spaces below, which were not up to modern standards. There was no insulation in the walls, and it was single glazed throughout. So a big piece of that puzzle was to protect the tenants. And so no tenant has been displaced without their choice in the delivery of this project. So there's a whole mix of units. So the ground floor, our project actually includes the guys who haven't been disrupted onto Bradbury Street themselves. So the record shop, the food stall, the food places, charity shops, that kind of stuff, and the jazz cafes, the 3 jazz bars. None of those have been asked to move out, but during the construction, the market pods had to be removed and replaced because they had no appropriate insulation for the times, and they were temporary use that had been gone. So this 10 shipping container scheme was essentially an enabling works project for the whole, to enable the whole project to happen. So the guys that were in here were all given a pod, literally the opposite one. They didn't get to rearrange, they were just kind of mirrored over to there. So that was built first with a deck. It's now currently in transition to go back to what it was before. And then all of the people upstairs were relocated to other premises that our client operates in the local borough. They were all given the opportunity to come back when the building opened. Most of them did, but some of them have stayed where they were because they were fairly comfortable. So there's a whole story here about this being an affordable workspace aimed at local people and trying desperately not to disrupt tenants. It absolutely makes the project much more difficult to deliver, but it's the right thing to do for the guys. And so now we're in a situation where we're still in transition, and the final, well, I wouldn't call it the final phase, but the next phase of the square is that these shipping containers are going to be removed. And Muff, he may have heard of, some of you, are going to deliver a kind of public space scheme that has been funded and is in construction. The first part of it was actually that the stage that you can use for events is now not timber decking, and it's now been made more firm, and there's kind of railings and various things, and the bench, improved benches. So the square is going through a transition that I think will include general removal of timber elements as much as possible for more hard-wearing, long-lasting elements, and hopefully some trees. I believe there are some trees, but we're not directly involved in that. Others of you may know more.
What's the age of these trees here?
So these ones would have been from 2006, when the square, all of this public space was created. So yeah, the actual ground we're on was made, and it was kind of formed in 2006. So that's a kind of fairly detailed history of the project. If I talk about the new building now, so which was opened in 2022, December 2022, there are basically three elements to it. There is the existing, I have a section I will refer to throughout, bear with me. How many of you guys are architects who like the geeky stuff?
Or aspiring architects?
Sure. I won't talk to, you can ask any questions you like, but I will try to talk more about spaces rather than construction in too much detail. So essentially what we're trying to do with the building is retain the old building. So there wasn't enough money to, and it's not the right thing to do, to demolish an existing Victorian building. So instead, this is actually, even though it doesn't look much like one, a complete, it's kind of a 1/3 extension and 2/3 refurbishment project. So what we've done, as a very simple diagram, is to replace the existing market pods with things that were similar sizes. So there are 10 of those units, and they are home to a really interesting mix of uses. So 1 and 2 is Marcus. We've got NTS radio, there's a barber shop in there, a whole range of various uses. So that is kind of use 1, and the idea with that architecturally is to allow them to close things off and keep them secure. So these big shutters are there, but when they open, they can use them to kind of brand and create their own signage, because what we found in the old market pods is they've been completely inhabited in a really interesting way over the years. Like, people are not going to hold back, they're going to brand themselves.
I missed what you said about the shops in Bradbury Street. So they're still there.
The shops on Bradbury Street are still there, so they back onto them. So in the section, these guys are here. So those poor soldiers were remaining in situ for the whole construction, but still operating. And so, yeah, they had to deal with the most amount of disruption. The other interesting thing I'll say as we get to it is, so 2 of them, so Cafe Coffee and Asarock, have actually knocked through as part of the project. So you can connect from Bradbury Street all the way into the square if they choose to manage it that way. So I think Marcos in Cafe Coffee will start to do that more and more. And so part of the project was to open up between them. So, and then, yeah, it's a fairly simple design. We asked the tenants a lot about what they wanted. The previous pods had kind of opening panels and all sorts of different things. They just needed the most flexible approach to suit a variety of businesses. So some of them wheel things out, like Gillett does here. Good chicken if anyone wants some chicken. Marcus's great coffee, the opens inside. And then others like NTS Radio will almost have it as a shop front. You can see into it, but you're not allowed to enter. So they operate it as their kind of they do their breakfast show from there, and it's like a recording studio basically. So very flexible. On top of that, which I'll show you, you can there is a kind of circulation area in the middle here. So if you look through, what you're actually looking through is a painted brick facade. So that is the old original Victorian brickwork. We've insulated on the inside of that and improved the middle floors. Now those are incredible, they're very light touch refurbishment. We added insulation, replaced the windows, new flooring, new decoration, but the floors remain wonky and old. We've ripped out very little of it, we've just kept it as it was. And then I guess where all of the kind of Hackney funding went, or the GLA money went, would have been on the top. And that's in creating about 500 square meters of additional new workspaces. So that's where our studio is. So what you've got is a mix of Victorian feeling workspaces in the middle with brand new kind of modern developments at the top. And we'll go through most of those types of space. In terms of, I'll just explain the materials from the outside and then we can go and have a little wander around unless anyone's got any questions. So we are, it's a really simple palette materials that needs to be kind of as robust as possible. So on the ground floor we've got mill-finish aluminium. You can pay more money to have it treated, but we didn't think that was worth it because we know that Hackney will provide the treatment themselves with graffiti and so on. Which interestingly they haven't. There's been a little bit, but partly because all of the businesses around in the square almost self-police the square. They've been preventing people from kind of doing what they normally do. They haven't had the same effect on the on the shipping containers, and they've only been there for 3 years. So something which was self-finishing was really important, and something which is almost, if it gets scratched, it doesn't ruin the effect. On top of that, we've got polycarbonate, which is essentially layers of very thin plastic, which is recyclable. If in the future we wanted to take it down, you can melt it down and reform it into other things. It's incredibly lightweight, it's fairly thermally insulative, and crucially it allows us to in a very light way, rebrand the whole of the back of the building and create a unifying front, which ultimately is, like all of that area is outside. So if we built the honest version of this project, there'd just be a big hole inside here. I'll explain when we go in why we chose to do it this way. And then if you were to step back, you would see more mill-finish aluminium on the roof. So essentially this is a fairly well-constructed shed with a kind of lightweight facade resting on top of a Victorian terrace. So it's a fairly mad diagram, but it is the right diagram we think for the project and for Dalston generally. Has anyone got any questions about any of that?
You demolish an old roof space in order to create a new one?
So yeah, there was an old butterfly roof. So that was one of the most controversial, just like this one basically, but much lower. That was one of the most challenging things to justify, was the removal of that, because they are historically significant. But the overall trade-off was that it's a net benefit for Hackney to do this. And so yeah, we did a lot of work encouraging people that was the right thing to do. Generally, it wouldn't be allowed in most contexts, but in this one, it would seem to be okay.
This is a very boring question, I'm afraid.
There's no boring questions.
Not very mucky. Is this all easy to clean? Like, I mean, can you hose down because it's plastic and everything? I just wonder whether over time, because it's maintenance of shared spaces, it's always the problem.
Yes.
Sorry, if you could repeat.
Is it easy to clean? Was the question.
The plastic.
Interesting. I think that kind of question is really important, because obviously these are affordable workspaces, and there isn't a huge budget of money in order to maintain these buildings necessarily. So the reason why we went for it with such a feeling of assurance it would be okay is, at the time this building was more than 15 years old, I think, when we were initially designing it, and I basically know that they've never washed the rain, it's self-cleaning in the weather, and we thought that looked pretty good. There are other really good examples in London. One of them won the Sterling Prize, the Laban Centre by Persson and Demeron in Greenwich. Deptford is great and has weathered well. So we looked at a lot of examples of it that have been weathered well. So it's essentially self-cleaning. I know for a fact that HCD have not paid any money for someone to scrub it, and we're at 3 years old. It's also great because weirdly on a sunny day, it looks fairly dark. It looks brilliant when it's cloudy, which is very rare for a piece of architecture to look better in the cloudy sky, but it reflects the sun in a more interesting, or reflects the sky in a more interesting way. So yeah, so that's the.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Are they leased or rented?
So they're rented. So
They're rented.
they-
So there isn't a service charge.
yeah, there is a service
There is a
charge
service
baked into that. Yes, so it would cover things like that,
Yeah.
but obviously the intention is for that to be as low as possible.
Yeah.
And I think they set the rent at, originally when we moved in, it was 70% cap, like 70% maximum of whatever the local market rate is. And so yeah, I think it's generally what you'll find amongst the people who are in the building is it's considered cheaper than almost everything around it. And many of them have moved from other local places for cheaper rent, basically.
And are they not, sorry,
It's okay, no, it's good.
boring to everybody. Are they locked into those rental agreements? Do they,
So generally it's a 3-year lease.
yeah, so it is a lease.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah. But I think that's fairly standard.
Yeah.
But they are very kind, which a lot of other landlords are not.
Yeah.
So if you say to them, we've just shut our business down, if they can fill it with somebody else, they will. So you'll just be able to transfer your lease.
I was around when they started, and the idea was easy in, easy out for businesses that were just getting going, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, so that isn't the case with this building, but I think they probably have other ones. So what they would say to you is, if you need a shorter term agreement, then go to one of our other units, but this one specifically is,
They being HCD.
yes. So we are now in the kind of, I guess we call this the terrace, but it's a kind of breakout space that's outside, but covers and connects back to the square. So if you remember, I was saying that previously there were essentially 2 decks on the building. So one just where you guys are sat, and one just above there, about the same dimensions as the one we've recreated. And so a big part of the kind of story was to try and recreate the bits of the building that were working well and that felt appropriate to Dalston. But also to make sure the building could be naturally ventilated, because there's absolutely no budget for mechanical ventilation, and it's also not the right thing to do in terms of sustainability. So there are a couple of options that we looked at, very high level. The first one, which I think was drawn up before our office even got involved in the project, was the obvious thing to do, which was to put all of the new workspace exactly where we're stood here, and essentially to build an indoor corridor that went from this door over to that door, and you would get units that are about 3 meters deep and along the square. The problem with that is that these units would be significantly worse, would become single aspects, would be harder to naturally ventilate, and would be darker. And the ones here would be so small as to be not particularly useful. But as these things go, the budgets was set and the funding was set on a kind of very high level, very quick thing that was done, working out how much area that could be made. So when we got involved, our brief was to essentially create that project as well as we could. The first move we did was to take the space that would have been created here and instead put it on top of the building in a pitched roof. So the original scheme assumed a flat roof, because that was all there was space for. And then below that, you would end up filling this space in with a corridor along here. So the big move that made all the difference and created the project we're in now was just simply taking that area, which is about, like I said, nearly 500 square meters in total in the end, and being able to put that up here in a mezzanine. So our unit, our office is basically in one of these mezzanines, right at the front of the building. And so we can show you that in a little while. In terms of architecturally what's happened here, as little as possible. So there's a flat roof here with a bit of timber and some kind of flexible tables and chairs that can be reconfigured. Events can happen here. Anyone who's in the building gets a key fob to this, even if they don't need to come through. And then other than that, this basically serves as a circulation areas for the people who are in there. These are the more affordable units in this particular project. So they range from as small as kind of 12 square meters to up to about 30 square meters. Don't take photos looking in too much, but you'll be able to peer in as we walk through and see the kinds of businesses that are in there. In terms of the tenants that we have in the building, so you've got anyone from kind of architects and designers that fill up the space, but the priority for Hackney Co-operative Developments would be to put people who serve the community in some way or are local. So that includes charities. I think the Labour Party are in here in one place. There is a barber shop is here. There's I think there's acting agents. There is even a charity shop somewhere. There's all like basically a whole range of businesses. These are not like slick workspaces. These are more creative or community-based businesses, which I guess lends itself to this aesthetic, which is fairly raw, fairly simple, and allows the tenants to inhabit it in any way they like. Yeah.
So what was the budget for this? You know, because the funding.
The funding. So the funding was from the GLA, basically part of it. There was also funding, some from HCD themselves, and then in the end, part of it was funded by Tradus Bank. So there was an extra funding raised during the project because from the initial starting point, we had a war in Ukraine and material prices going crazy, and we were already on site at that point. So additional funding was required. In the end, it was £2.4 million, which is a fairly amazing budget. But the original budget was a lot lower than that, and I think we would have got there if it weren't for material price changes. And actually, if you think about it, not much of the budget. Most of the budget went on the new stuff upstairs. Some of it went into new pile foundations downstairs. But ultimately, that's just decoration and a bit of extra insulation and some new windows. There's not a huge amount there. So even though it's a really large building, per square metre, it's fairly affordable.
Are any of the tenants co-ops?
I have no idea. You could find out. They should. Well, there's a list of them on the sign on the front door. You could probably find out. Not that I know of necessarily.
So the acting agency is a co-op.
Oh, okay. What else to say? So we've got, like I said, so a bit of timber in here. We've got stainless steel wire mesh balustrades, which are fairly easy and simple. We're exposing the steel frame where we can. Because the steel frame here is essentially used to hold up the workspace that's on top, and it goes all the way through the building. Interestingly, they line up with exactly where the party walls are, all these columns and the whole structural grid. So they adjust by an irritating kind of 50 mil every single one, and it's fairly complicated to lay them out. But they also adjust, if you look at them, they adjust in distance away from the building, because the old building is incredibly wonky. So we had lots of challenging, and that one's even smaller, look, because we had to fit it around a kind of old protruding element. So there's a lot of work in making the stuff that in the end seems fairly simple work in an old building. But in the end, when you get to the top, it's nice and square and it all works out fairly neatly. So like I said, external deck circulation is easier to maintain, cheaper. Allows fresh air. Tenants generally like it. The one thing we didn't anticipate, or we did anticipate but we couldn't resolve, is that the square on a sunny day like today will get incredibly noisy by about lunchtime. So there are general acoustic challenges, but most people have got used to it. It doesn't bother us too much. If we've got a really important meeting, we'll try and make sure it's in the morning or not on a sunny day. It goes completely dead in the winter. Yeah, and so if we can, let's move through. Actually, sorry, one other thing I will say. You came through the entrance area. There's a kind of multicoloured palette of materials. It's almost like a simple wayfinding device. It's CMYK, so C is all the different 4 colours that you use to kind of make any magazine or printing. So the idea is you can create anything from those 4 colours. And so the entrance is K, which is black, so key, and then you come all the way up through the different colours. So it's a very simple thing. It's the only colour in the whole building that we chose. Some tenants have gone mad and painted colours themselves, and that's fine, they're allowed to do that. They're allowed to inhabit it, they just have to put it back to white when they leave. So yeah, we'll see as we go through.
How is this balcony space used? How does it compare with your expectations about how it's
Yeah, so good question. I think it is used, people who have these units, they use them all the time, so nip out. People are working in here on a nice day, that kind of thing. The big challenge is, and that works really well, so you've got, for example, NTS, who are a radio station, very successful, they have massive summer parties. So anyone who's lucky enough to have a key to this building comes and enjoys the view and kind of hangs out and uses the toilets and all that kind of thing. We've also had events, so HCD don't mind if you request to have an event in the evening. So we had all of the kind of more construction-based businesses that are in the building all had a kind of shared event over here. I want them to do a fashion show at some point. We've had inquiries about that, but ultimately I'm not involved in kind of organising that, so it's up to them to work it out. So it does get used, but also we have to remember that it's also a fire escape, and it's also kind of, you know, what everybody needs to use all the time to get to their units. So if you have you can't have a private event here because you can't stop anyone who uses these units from doing it. So there was also an art project last summer where people hung artwork in the openings as part of an event for the square. So it's kind of, yeah, it's been used, and I think people will work out what else to do with it as they go, as we move on. So the next bit of the tour is, if everyone wants to, we can go out here, go up, walk along, and just have a little look in, and then we'll go up to the top floor. So I think
The whole country.
Oh right.
Yeah, we're just sitting there doing that.
So we
The
are
acting's
looking
not
at my little
on.
diagram. We are here now.
Yeah.
So we are on the, I guess, the top access terrace. So again, you remember I mentioned that we don't want corridors in this building. So this is a external deck access. One of the crucial limitations of the context we're in is that this is a conservation area. What that means is we have to respect our neighbours, the historical importance of our neighbours. And so you can't see the building if you stand down by any of those shops on the ground floor. And that was a key limitation that was important to us. So from the historical Bradbury Street side, you should not be able to see the building. So what that means is there's an angle that's worked out very easily, which is the angle of the roof lines up exactly with that point there. And so all you'll see on the street is a tiny little trim of aluminium, and other than that, it's not visible. So behind here, not that I'd encourage you to lean over, you can feel and you'll hit brick very quickly. That is the old historical parapet of the building that has not been disturbed. It's extremely challenging to do this part in terms of the construction, and part of the reason that this is so thick is because this wall is incredibly wonky on the other side. And so it made more sense for us to slightly limit this width rather than have this jiggling all over the place. So the steelwork actually behind it is doing all sorts of things. In terms of these units, this is NTS Radio's units, so they're the only one that have got a double, so you should be able to peer in and see. If this were in the week, they normally let us go in, but it's a private office, some of these places, so we can't unfortunately show you. But I can talk about the construction methods when we go into the meeting room in a moment. But what I'd encourage you to have a look at, I mean, on our website you can see photos of that space inside and so on. But it's a very simple approach, which is a domestic stair. So this is a kind of £500 timber stair that you put in, you know, the cheapest possible to buy stair. But we had really good joiners on the project, so we kind of elevated that with some slightly nicer bit of timber stud work. The balustrades in the end are all kind of using that same rhythm, and then the soffits are exposed with the same. So it's essentially a steel frame building, but most of it is timber infill. So all of these walls are infilled with timber. Everything is basically the
So
majority.
they've got two floors, basically.
These are the mezzanine units, yeah. So those mezzanine floors are the bits that I said we didn't build downstairs.
Yeah.
We had to basically achieve a certain square meterage, and so we essentially built them upstairs in kind of mezzanine units.
When it rains on the roof, what's that like?
It's insulation in there, so it's fine.
Okay.
You hear it more on. There are also domestic style skylights. These are Velux skylights, the biggest you can buy. Everything's operated by a pole,
Yeah.
so you can you hear it on the rain on the skylight more than you hear it on the roof.
Yeah, no, I've been
yeah.
in ones that were built.
Was to try and find ways to give back or offer something extra to the people, to the businesses in the building that might not have room in their own units. So you can, you have to rent it, but if you're in the building, you can rent it for less money than anybody. But it also can be offered to anyone in the community. And what they tend to do is they give it away to anyone who has a good reason to have it for free. So we have a range of people. You have the reason why it's kind of fairly worn in is all of these tables, you can kind of pick them up, move them across, people seem to draw on them. It's not your normal workspace slick meeting room with all the stuff. It is move things around, reconfigure it as you like, put it back as you found it. There's a church here on a Sunday sometimes, I think, we've heard that. All sorts of different things are happening in this room. But while we're in here, I can quickly, because there's a bit more room, our unit, our office is basically this. So this is, the gable ends of the building are different to the rest of the project, because everything doesn't quite resolve itself in the same way. So this part here was originally going to be connected to upstairs, but for various complicated building regulations reasons, it made sense for this one upstairs to be its own unit. So that's become the fairly unique one which we rented. Here is kind of meeting room, but so the construction there is exactly the same as those units we were walking past. So you can see that you get plasterboard, deals with fire issues, and it's fairly kind of neutral and can be redecorated. All of the soffits, there was actually a value, part of a value engineering exercise, so a kind of cost saving exercise, was to remove the plasterboard from these ceilings and put more insulation on top. But we think it gives a kind of rhythm and a character to an otherwise fairly plain space. And so that's partly why you see that it's got 2 or 3 layers of paint on it, but other than that, it is the original structural grade. It's not fancy visual grade timber, and people can even paint that if they like. Nobody thus far has bothered. And like I said, so these are just domestic skylights operated by poles. So what we want is everyone to understand how to use things, and if they break, to fix them fairly easily, and kind of keep them just as messy as possible. All the tables and chairs are folding, which makes them slightly less comfortable, but means we can reconfigure it for other reasons. Shall we go into our workspace? So that's where the tour will end. I think you can all squeeze in. I'm going to show a film, but there's also 2 models of this project that you can have a look at. We only have one window, but it's a good one. Yeah. So as you're climbing the stairs, 2 models is, yeah, I found it. So that's the first one. So there's a 1:25 model, made out of pine board and various things. There was a much bigger skylight on the north side at the top, so they've instead changed to a few small ones, but this space is not dark, it's fine. And the market pods were going to open like this, but Hackney had an example of that breaking, and so they asked us not to do it, and this is a lot easier to maintain. But other than that, we more or less built that kind of diagram that was made very early in the project.